Who doesn't love a good makeover? I found this witch at Dollar Tree. She's got great features. That nose, that chin, her bone structure. Let's make this a real rags to riches story. Like from Dollar Tree drab to dynamite.
This is a piece of fabric tube that I had. I really need to figure out how high I want this to be. Let's do the next step, which is cutting off this pumpkin from Walmart. I wonder if that could be part of her hat.
Skittle-a-do, I said bim bop. Skittle-a-do, I said bim. Skittle-a-do, I said skid out and bop. Skittle-a-do, I said bim bop boom. Skittle-a-do, I said bim bop. Skittle-a-do, I said bim. Skittle-a-do, I said skid out and bop. Skittle-a-do, I said bim bop boom.
But here's a good idea of what she looks like proportionately from top to bottom. I think that works pretty well. Don't you? Next up, I'm going to use some fabric stiffener, shake it up well. I'm going to use this on what will end up being the brim of my witch's hat. I'm going to pour some in there. It's pretty runny, so it's not quite like working with Mod Podge. So here's an idea. It has to be really saturated. It's runny, but I didn't realize what the consistency would be like. I haven't used this in a really long time. There we go. So now we've sort of got it stuck down. It says apply it with a brush, but you know what? I'm not going to be able to get what I want if I don't really pour it on here. It does say that it needs to be saturated, so I would say that is really pretty saturated. Now for the moment of truth. I'm going to go ahead and peel up my press and seal paper. Pretty rigid. Let me get my witch and take a look at the scale of the brim. That's pretty good. However, I decide to set it up. A little bit of a tilt there on the hat. Okay, on to step 352. I took that lace that was a table runner, and what I've done is run a zigzag stitch with a thread through it to gather it up. So this is going to be the outer skirt for the witch's pumpkin dress. But it also needed something to give it a little more substance. So I've done the same thing, and I have gathered up some tulle to use, sort of like a petticoat, to give the skirt some fullness. And I did pink the edges of the tulle, if you can see that. That way there's a little bit more design interest than just a straight line. This will lay over the top. So what it does is it definitely gives the skirt some lift and makes it feel a little bit more fleshed out and elegant. So I've moved on to the wig or the hair for my witch. And what I've done is I've cut a piece of felt that actually will serve as a bit of a wig cap, which will get glued onto her head like this. And what I'm doing is I am cutting pieces of this big thick yarn. I'm cutting these 23 inches long. So, I mean, you really could just do 24 inches, but I sort of looked at it and determined how I wanted it to look. I'm cutting multiple strips or strands of this, and what I will do is I will put them on this little wig cap all in a row like so, and I'm going to just run a top stitch. So here are the strands sewn onto my little wig cap base. I ran 4 of them up until the point where I put in this little dart, and as you saw on the witch, that dart sort of gives us the cup shape in order to glue it to her head in a form-fitting way. And what I did was I took 2 additional strands and I sewed them down along that edge so that when this comes together and you glue it, you really have the straight part. And this will all be sort of glued down around her face, but you can already see it taking shape here and how it's going to look. So I'm going to go ahead and use my heat gun to sort of soften up the plastic of these hands, soft enough that I can mold this around the dowel rod so that it looks more like our witch is actually holding on to her broom. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use some masking tape. We'll see if I can get it into a shape where it looks a little bit more like she's just got a finger pointing. So I think that's pretty good. So after mixing several different colors of paint, I think that's a pretty good match. What I'm doing here is I am cutting this piece of ribbon to sort of just fit around the base of the pumpkin. And I'm going to glue this ribbon down the front. So that becomes like the front panel of what you might say is like an Elizabethan skirt. And I'm going to go ahead and glue on what is a really expensive piece of ribbon. But what that does is it brings the quality up. So it really elevates the whole project. I'm going to pull that as tight as possible as I'm moving down the pumpkin so that I get it to form around the pumpkin, the curve of it all. So I think I can go ahead and move on to the next step comfortably. And what I'm going to do here is decide exactly where I want the underskirt or petticoat of my witch's skirt laid out. I have my petticoat or underskirt glued down so you can kind of see what that's doing. What I did next was I added a piece of trim, like a sequin rickrack trim, to the front panels of the overskirt, just on the sides, give it a nice little bit of sparkle and some definition to that edge. And I'm going to go ahead and resume work on the witch's bodice. Now, I have taken 2 little pom-poms and put them on her chest, approximately where her breasts would be, maybe a little high for what we're considering an old hag. So now we secured that. Okay, I'm gonna go back to my fancy ribbon, and what I'm gonna do is I'm going to run a panel up the front that will come in at the waist, and I'm gonna do the same thing with a panel at the back. Okay, so there we have it. We now have her mostly dressed and looking pretty spiffy. Okay, let's work on the collar. So I have this gorgeous trim from Hobby Lobby, which is a ruffled velvet, so very nice collar. So let me go ahead. I'm gonna do this like I would do a real costume. I'm gonna go ahead and put some glue there. That's gonna be where we start, and it's in the seam is where I would normally run this. So the seam of the ruffle lines up with the inside seam of the sleeve, which basically goes under the arm. So you kind of see it just like on any real clothing that we all have. The seams are always run under the arms. I have decided what pieces of ribbon I wanted to put around her waist to make a belt. Okay, well that joins pretty nicely in the back. I'm going to use this as my buckle, which is actually part of an earring. I have to devise how my torso is going to sit on top of the pumpkin. So what I've done is I've taken a yardstake for a decoration. So this is a little plastic pointed stake, and I went ahead and poked a hole through the top of the pumpkin where the stem was, and then that'll be nice and tight. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to glue a piece of cardboard all the way around this spike. So now I've got a piece of cardboard that is just the right size to slip inside the bottom of the witch's torso, which was a fabric tube. So that will give me just enough space to be able to glue this on. So what I'm gonna do for starters is I'm gonna go ahead and put this down and secure it with some hot glue. Make sure that it's pretty tight. I had trimmed this out with some sequin rickrack, which ultimately I ended up not liking, so I took it off. So what I decided was I'm going to take this trim, which is a nice looking, a little more expensive looking piece of trim, and what I've done is I've created a loop a bit like a ribbon, and what I will do is I'll glue it so that it's actually draping down the front of the witch, and that will finish this edge off nicely. It's more substantial, has more silver in it, which I really needed more silver on the bottom of the skirt to tie in with what's going on at the top of the skirt. And I'm going to add another layer of trim on top of this. And I found this really fun sort of fringe. It almost looks like hair. And I'm gonna layer that around the top edge. And then this little girl will go on top. So it gives me just another little layer of interest there. is I've added some really nice, expensive pieces of trim. So I have this pearl with rhinestone trim that I got at a fabric store years ago that I've been holding on to for just the right thing. And what I did was I went ahead and ran a line on either side of the ribbon, which adds some of that cool pearl detail, more geometry with the diamonds, and it also matches the sort of cream color of the pumpkin. And I've gone ahead and made her a little necklace as well that matches. So brings it from the skirt to the top here, which is really nice. Then I've added that applique that I showed you as her little shawl. And I love that this is an applique that would have been sewn onto a blouse or a jacket or something. And I think it's this cool, like old detail that makes it look like Granny's old shawl that she's had for years and years. And it has this great little beading detail. I could have gone with something glitzier, but they all just seem to sort of distract from the overall idea of a witch, albeit a very glamorous witch. I'm moving on to another step, which is making the witch's broom. And what I've done is I've just gone ahead and gone out into the yard and found an old dried up vine on a tree. And what I've done is I've taken one of these little black sprigs from Michael's and I've sort of ripped it apart. So there are 4 pieces here. And interestingly enough, it really matches the fringe that I put under the sleeves and around the waistline of my witch. It's kind of that same idea. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach these. I've got a really good plume sort of established. The plume end of the broom looks really good, really nice and full, since I did actually use 2 of them. I've got a lot of debris in there, which is like peeled off hot glue from my fingers and other debris that's on the table. Good reason to be mindful of keeping your workspace clean. All right, let's see how the floral tape works. For those of you who haven't used it, the key is to be pulling it ever so slightly as you're winding it around. And that sort of activates the wax that covers it, and then you can pull it off. So that gives us the end of the broom. Try it on. I like it. It's got some curvature. It's a little irregular, but really gives us the idea. All right, what I've done so far is I've gone ahead and worked on her hair. Pulled back some of the pieces so that it's half up, half back, and then I gathered it all in the back, tied it up, braided it, and tucked it under, and glued it under on both sides. So it's not perfectly symmetrical, but it looks pretty nice, straight on. And so I'm ready to work on her hat. You remember that piece that I put fabric stiffener on? Well, here it is. I spray painted it to give it a little bit more sheen, because I'm going to run some glue. I'm going to start by gluing this knot down, and I'm going to bring it around into a bit of a swirl, and just big enough that I have hair sort of poking out around the stem. A generous amount of glue. I want the tilt of the stem to sort of face to her left. I'm going to continue to glue around and bring the hair mostly underneath So you can see what that's starting to do is it's swirling up and around.
Skittle-a-do, I said, bim, bop. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim. Skittle-a-do, I said, skid out and bop. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim, bop, boom. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim, bop. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim. Skittle-a-do, I said, skid out and bop. Skittle-a-do, I said, bim, bop, boom.
I'm getting very close to the end, but what I'm doing is I'm taking this peel and stick craft felt. I'm gonna go ahead and cut out the circle, and this is gonna go on the bottom of my witch. Now, at this point, you're gonna be a little surprised because I'm gonna go ahead and reveal the embellishments that I've added to our witch. Here she is. And she's all done up. So what I did was I added some earrings, which actually were earrings that came from Walmart a few years ago. They're little spiders, and then little stud sets, which are really good for stuff like this. I also added a big black spider that's hidden in this plume that I made, which is from the same trim that I used on the sleeves and around the waist. So that ties the top of the hat in. So we've got the skirt, the shoulders, the hat. So all of that is tied together. Oh, I also added her little pet spider, which is on a ring that goes around her ring finger. So it's a little rhinestone spider that was also an earring. Other than that, I've gone through and I've sort of tacked down the skirt and the underskirt to the side and sort of affixed that up at the top, so that it'll always drape more or less the same way. As I was saying, one of my last steps here is now going to be to go ahead and glue down this felt. That covers up the raw edge of the ribbon, which is kind of nice. You can see this is the bottom edge now. And paint the mouth black. I may even add some eyelashes. After living with her for a few days, that I wanted to go back and add just a few more finishing details and finishing touches to give her just a little bit more texture and interest. I know you're probably thinking, wow, that wasn't enough, but it's never enough until it's enough. Ribbon scraps that they sell at Hobby Lobby. They come in a package, all of this bundled together. I then mixed them up appropriately. So I'm gonna mix my colors up a bit by separating them out like this and making sure that all of my colors are generously mixed in all the way around. Then what I'm going to do is take a zip tie and put it on the end, as close to the end of that as possible and as tight as possible. So now I have them all bunched together. It's pretty well mixed between the black and the white. We're gonna tuck that in to the waistband area in here. So what I really wanna do is more or less secure these under the loops of these ribbons that I have here. Well, gosh, it adds this sort of pretend distressed look that gives it a little bit of a high-end feel. I also want to go ahead and add a little bit more rhinestone trim. So again, from Hobby Lobby, I got this really nice trim, which was $1.49 a yard. And it's not rhinestone cups, it's actual little rhinestones in a plastic setting, which makes it relatively inexpensive, which is great. Makes it really pretty affordable. And I'm gonna run it around this loop like so and down that front ribbon. I think that'll be a nice addition. That's really nice. Gives it a lot of body. And you know, like I said before, mixing a more expensive, or in this case, expensive looking trim, because it's real rhinestones, with the inexpensive stuff always elevates the whole thing. So something I always do and recommend doing. I kind of dress that way too. Like, I get that people love designer jeans, but I've never understood why a pair of jeans should cost over $100 or even anywhere close to $100. So like, I'll wear a more expensive shirt with jeans from Target. So here is my more expensive dirt mixed in with jeans from Target, because the spiderweb lace that I used for the skirt was from the Dollar Tree. It was a table runner for $1.25 for a piece that I used on the skirt, the sleeves, and the hat. So really good use of that. And now I'm using a much more expensive looking trim and then a really expensive trim alongside of the ribbon and the expensive ribbon. So altogether, it really elevates the whole thing. I'm gonna go ahead and put it on the cuffs and around the collar. So it's a little bit perhaps of gilding the lily, but I can live with that. All right, last detail is I'm gonna add some wire to the back of her hat so that I can get that really cool tilt to it. Even though I use that fabric stiffener, it really has a hard time acting the way I want it to act. But now you can see she has a very smart up tilt at the back of the hat, which gives her a good angle from the sides, from the back. So it's a much better thing. I think I'm gonna have to give her a ring. So I am going to take one of these stones and glue it to a finger. And the reason I'm not putting it on her ring finger, of course, is because that's where her spider friend lives, dangling from her ring finger. All right, last thing is her broom. That sort of finishes off the broom nicely where the seam is, so the seam is covered. She holds her broom. You can see that nice piece of trim there. Now, the last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get my blow dryer out. This is a really good way to get rid of all of your little web of hot glue. Arachnadia is looking pretty good and finally at a point where I will say she is finished.
Here's a little treat, best before Halloween's over. A video of how I created Arachnadia reticula.
All sorts of texture around the skirt. You can still see the spider web. You still see our big ribbon and the loops around the peplum. You see that nice trim at the center back. And we've still got our side silhouette, which is really important to me. So the next shot you'll see is where I'm gonna put her in the house. And I've also come up with a really good idea for a pedestal for her that is really inexpensive, mostly clear, and lights up. So it's kind of a really neat effect.
If you like this video, you're really gonna like the next one. It's a life-size headless witch, Harriet the Headless. Thank you for watching.